George Soros has given $18 billion to his pro-democracy foundation. That's the Open Societies Foundations. He had $24 billion fortune. He put $18 billion into this pro-democracy foundation, which has tentacles into America for like the last solid
that like
10,
an open
15
conspiracy
years. It is. It is. Yeah, and that's a reference
that
Tony's
reference,
making.
yeah,
I mean,
right, okay.
H.G. Wells, who was like the British mastermind of the Anglo-American establishment for psychological warfare, technocracy, and transhumanism. First off, H.G. Wells wanted a world encyclopedia that eventually like became the internet. So that's like ideas they had that came to fruition through America, DARPA, ARPA type things, right?
I believe he was a socialist sympathizer, even though
He was
wrote
he was a
a book
Fabian
that was
socialist,
against,
which
yeah.
is English socialism, IngSoc, that's in 1984, right?
It's just interesting that he painted in such a bad light, but he was, at least early on, sympathetic to that, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think he's an interesting character in history. He wrote
He's
Time
weird,
Machine,
yeah.
but he was also in Rhodes Roundtable group meetings, and he wrote about it in his personal 2-volume experiment and autobiography. So he's in with the Cliveden set, the Rhodes Roundtable group, the Fabian socialists, the wolves in sheep's clothing,
right?
Essentially, right? And then he wrote The Open Conspiracy. He wrote The New Machiavelli. He wrote The New World Order in 1939. That's one of his books. So yeah, these people, it's not, they didn't just invent all this sort of thing. So Soros, I asked about where did Soros get his money, right? Where did he get his funding? So I asked that when I was in DC interviewing one of the authors of this book, Dope Inc. Right? This is a really interesting book about the Anglo-American establishment, the drug trade, the British Empire, and how, according to one of the authors of the book during the interview, Soros got his money from the Swiss Rothschilds. And at the time, I had just started my book project on the Rothschilds, and I pushed back. I was like, there are no Swiss Rothschilds. He said, yes, there are. He said, look it up when you get home. So I get home and I'm looking it up. And yeah, there's a French portion of the Rothschild family. I think it was Maurice Rothschild, who moves to Switzerland. He's one of the founders of Bilderberg Group in 1954. And it's like the background financing of how Soros got funded. And Soros made his bones in the early 90s betting against, I think, the British sterling and tried to crash the market. And that's where he became a billionaire. So he practices arbitrage and chaos magic. He considers himself the Messiah. I probably have that article here in the History Blueprint. It comes from an LA Times article, maybe 2002. Let me see if I can find it real quick here for you. There's a lot of Soros.
Is it Edmond Adolphe de Rothschild, Baron Edmond Adolphe Maurice and Jules and Jacques de Rothschild? Figure that one out. 30, yeah. So he was born 1926, died in 97, but was a French Swiss banker, the founder of the Edmond de Rothschild Group in 1953. His investments extended to vineyards, yacht racing, farming, and hospitality, according to the. I have to fix my.
Here's a Reuters source for the $18 billion. George Soros Foundations now control $18 billion. It's
crazy.
If one of his singular goals is to crush American democracy, what do you think? How much influence do you think 18 billion buys you? I don't even think Bill Gates has put 18 billion into like a group that influences our democracies so much as what Soros does, right?
There we go.
There's this email hack.
Well, that's the big question.
I have his general theory of reflexivity. That's a good, if you want to understand
Soros. That's fascinating, right? Rich. That's oh my God, a little bit of synchronicity, because
he's in cybernetics.
Well, that's the point. The reflexive theory of cybernetics. It's one of George Soros's social cybernetic theories that I was going to actually include from the Professor Umpleby lecture series, 6-hour lecture series he gave. I didn't because it was too much, but I did find it. So maybe in the town hall, we'll go over that clip, because he has a lot to say about cybernetics applied to social systems specifically.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys this real quick. This is an entry in the History Blueprint for Soros, Toward a New World Order, The Future of NATO by George Soros, 1993. And I scanned this into Scribd. So there's this isn't my copy, but here's a Scribd link for it, right? So hold on a second. I'm going to mute my microphone. I've never done this before. Let's see if this works. I'm going to take you into the other studio to show you an artifact.
All right,
Why
Tony, you
the-
can hear me?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's flip my
I
camera
can
so
cover
you
while
can
you
see.
want to, if you have to.
All right, so you can see this is my view when I do the show here. Okay, I'm gonna take you over here to the other room. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, it looks good. See it perfectly.
That's a pamphlet from the NATO meeting. George Soros made this.
November
So that's one of
November
the
29th,
artifacts.
93.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and you can look it up. You can find an online copy of it right now. But that's one of the. It's a small meeting. He personally printed that for the meeting to pitch, and that's an artifact.
So
There's
his
another
funding,
artifact.
I have a question here. His funding comes from Rothschild. What was his education? Do you know? Who's some of his main
London School
mentors?
of Economics. I'm pretty
London
sure he
School?
went to the Rothschild
Okay.
School.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, perfect.
And just for the record,
Wow. It's part of the Anglo-American hegemony, making sure that they reestablish communion with America. That was really Rhodes' legacy. And they did it through multiple ways. One was through language control, history, the rewriting of history, to sort of point out how much of a shared common history we have together, sort of a shared destiny, shared culture, that sort of nonsense. It's fascinating how many areas they influenced. And now they're, Luke not begged the question, but asked the question, like, what is the goal here? Is it just playing the dialectical game, order out of chaos? Is it more destabilization? I take more
They
of the
manipulate, and I mean, Soros, his
I
job
take the
is like,
destabilization aspect.
yes,
Yeah, that's
manipulating elections. Like they've done this in other
Right.
countries.
Mhm.
This is the whole thing. And Soros's Open Society foundations, they use Gene Sharp's technology or methodology on how. There's a documentary called How to Start a Revolution. And in
Yes,
1968,
I know exactly what you're talking
Gene
about.
Sharp
Yeah,
for the
Gene
American
Sharp.
military
Yep.
came up with a methodology to overthrow and destabilize organizations around the world. And it was used by the CIA and MI6 to overthrow all
Like
these countries during
the cover
20th
was
century.
Saul Lewinsky, but it wasn't right. It was Sharp. It's a good point.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Because I thank you for bringing that up, actually.
So, I mean, they have an active, it's like if Soros didn't work as part of Operation Gladio, they missed out because he really would have been a great part of that destabilization, supranational NATO controlled terrorist force to make a new world order. I mean, it's literally Spectre that Ian Fleming like puts it right in front of everybody, but you don't see it
right
until later.
That's fascinating. The Gene Sharp angle, I did not. Yeah, I'm just looking up. Yeah,
I got him here in the history blueprint. I'll look them up real quick too. So I
there's
saw the
this thing
documentary
here.
and then I looked them up. And Gene Sharp, Eugene Sharp. So he worked in the International Republican Institute. He took strategies by von Clausewitz and Machiavelli. He applied them for the Rand Corporation. He graduated from Harvard University. He's part of the British conquest to recolonize America, 1781, the present. Let's see, University of Oxford, he also did some time at. And let's see, Albert Einstein Institute, Arab Spring protests. Like they used his methodology.
Yeah.
And then How to Start a Revolution is a 2011 documentary about his playbook. And it was also used in Occupy Wall Street, which is like the chickens coming home to roost. And then from that, you could see other movements and these sort of things. And the
Saul
opposite strategy
was, they say that Gene Sharp took from Saul Lewinsky, but I don't know which one. They both were essentially contemporaries. So
this would be an opposite strategy, anything by Etienne de la Boétie.
That's true. Real quick, this is fascinating about this with
freedom and slavery. There you go.
It's with Rothschilds here. There's this section here, Rich. I just have to point out because I find it kind of interesting. It's about Israel and Edmund. Edmund de Rothschild's grandfather, Baron Edmund James de Rothschild, had set up the acquisition of lands in Ottoman Palestine for Jewish development in the 1800s. In the 1950s, Edmund de Rothschild donated the family's property to the new Israeli state. And in 1953, he gave 7,500 acres of the town Caesarea to the newly created Caesarea Rothschild Foundation, which was co-owned by the Israeli state. The foundation was tasked with the redistribution of Caesarea's profits to education programs in Israel.
Well,
That's fascinating.
James de Rothschild and his widow Dorothy, James de Rothschild donated the money for the Knesset to be built. Here's Maurice de Rothschild in History Blueprint. He died in 1957. Bilderberg was created in 1954. I'm pretty sure. So it was Maurice de Rothschild, who was the father of Edmund Adolf.
Yeah, that's him.
And then this is the beginning of the Swiss Rothschilds. They were also involved with James Armand de Rothschild in funding the Knesset and helping to form the state of Israel, which their family had been colonizing Palestine since the 1870s. So there's that. But this is the guy. This is who I found out with in the
that's the one I was looking at. That's where I'm reading from. Yeah, it's just really fascinating. They set up this thing after the 6-Day War called the Israeli Corporation Investment to basically sort of, I don't know. It's a weird.
And then you can read about this story just real quick in the memoirs of Guy de Rothschild. So these are real people. They had real influence. And here's 1829 newspapers saying that they wanted to buy up all of Palestine. Right. That's
exactly about the time.
So it's not coincidence.
The early 1800s here.
It's business plans and colonization, opportunities. The British and the Zionists had similar goals for that area. They worked a deal. This is part of the history of the Balfour Declaration. It's on paper. This is we should just know about this stuff. And then it makes Anglo-American establishment and using America for the property manager for the British Empire around the world a lot easier to see clearly when it's some of our allies might not be our allies.
I just think it's funny, that reference about Israel, the 1800s investment with Edmund. I just clicked on it, and it takes you to Understanding World Religions, a roadmap for justice and peace. And that's the reference where they come to, yeah. So just to see the type of propaganda.
Well, I'm just going to read this.
That's so insane.
The 1926 to 1997 Rothschild. After the death of his uncle, James Armand de Rothschild, 1957, he was left as the only direct male descendant of his grandfather and carried on his grandfather's enthusiastic support for Israel. Following the advice of Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, Edmund concentrated on providing capital to create jobs in the infant state, a policy which brought him into conflict with his uncle's widow, his aunt, Dorothy de Rothschild, who preferred philanthropy as policy. See? Rather than loans, they like to do the philanthropy. Arguments within the family about the same topics. So it's not like the Rothschilds are all one side or the other. There's a lot of diversity, and a lot of people in the family today don't know the history of their own family because there's 30 different versions of it from all their different cousins and the different books and autobiographies and biographies and movies. But
it's a good point, Rich. That's a very good point. Yeah.
All right, so we made it through George Soros land there. That was a fun little excursion. That was unplanned. That wasn't really on the show card.
If you haven't heard about our Grand Theft World community membership, here are a few of the things you've been missing. A mobile app where you can access replays of the Grand Theft World podcast and show notes. Access to the Grand Theft World community on Discord, where we crowdsource news and resources, and you can contribute to the show. The opportunity to participate in the Grand Theft World bi-weekly town hall. Exclusive content from Richard Grove, including behind-the-scenes footage and future access to unpublished material. 93 episodes of the Peace Revolution podcast, and the Grand Theft World newsletter delivered straight to your inbox each week. If you want to stay ahead of the great game, visit us at grandtheftworld.com, click or tap the button in the top right-hand corner, and join a vibrant community of researchers blazing a new path to truth. We'll see you there.